Last week I was out with my family shopping and we were in a garden centre, and on the way out we saw a tiny little barbecue, and my wife said to me, imagine cooking a brisket on that. And we kind of laughed about it, and I thought, I wonder if I could cook a brisket on that. Maybe I'll try it. So I went back to the garden centre and picked up this tiny little Weber Smoky Joe. It is 37 centimeters or 14.5 inches wide, and I'm gonna cook a brisket on it. And a tiny little barbecue needs a tiny little brisket. So I went online and found the smallest brisket that I could. And this is a 1953 Sao Paulo brisket from John Davidson's, and it is 3.75 kilograms. And you could definitely pick up a smaller brisket, but I really wanted to cook a packer cut brisket rather than just a flat or just the point. It's actually looking quite good. Some nice marbling in the flat. I'm sure plenty of people have cooked briskets on these Weber Smoky Joes, and I'm sure they've come out really good, but I wanted to do it myself and see how it came out. I'm just gonna trim it down like I would any other brisket, and hopefully it will be small enough to fit on the Smoky Joe. Such a cute little brisket. And that is looking like a brisket. Of course it would, because it is a brisket, but I like how it's a full pack of brisket. It's still got the same proportions as a kind of typical size brisket that I would cook, rather than it kind of having like a huge flat and no point. So hopefully this will cook up nicely. And obviously I paid real attention to make sure it's nice and aerodynamic. It's going to be so close to the coals that there's a good chance that anything sticking out is going to burn. And in terms of seasoning, I'm going to go in with 2 parts pepper to 1 part salt. And because we've got it, I'm gonna hit it with a layer of Lowry's just over the top for an extra salty kick. Nicely trimmed up, nicely seasoned. I'm really hoping that I trim this to the right size so I don't have to re-trim it and re-season it. Take it outside and fire up the pit. So I was gonna cook this on the ground, but I've got my little dog walking around and I don't want him to sniff around it and burn himself. Conveniently, it fits on top of my chub box, and the lid fits in there too. So in terms of how this thing cooks, you've got vents here controlled by this rather than the kind of wheels on the bottom like you would on a regular kettle. There's one on this side and one on this side. Real stiff little vent up top. And I was thinking about drilling some holes in the bottom for airflow, but then I wouldn't be able to block it off if things get too hot. So we're just gonna go with out the box rather than making any mods. I'll go in with some charcoal. And I'm gonna go in with this little bread pan. Keep coals over to one side, but also to catch any fat drippings that come out, which there will be plenty, and I don't want to start a grease fire in such a small little area. So I'm gonna take a guess that that is probably good. Some nice oak wood on a few bits, see what happens. And hopefully our little brisket fits. It's gonna be fine that this is gonna be a bit too big because it will shrink. Going on with our lid, sticking a probe there. I'm not too worried about the temperature right now, but I wanna make sure that it doesn't get up to like 400 degrees. As long as we're over 200, nice and smoky, we should be good. And I've got my vents set open about halfway at the back. Yeah, see what happens. So as I say, I'm gonna keep this cook real simple. I didn't want to do too much in terms of modifications. Didn't even season the barbecue. I think generally we're just gonna be too close to the coals and might end up with some crispy spots, but I think it's gonna be good. So it's been about half an hour and this is settled in around 240, and that's probably about as hot as I want to cook today, given I'm so close to the coals. And we got our back vents just over a quarter, maybe just under a half open. And yeah, we're sitting pretty evenly. So we're about 3 hours in on this cook and we're not looking too bad. Not a huge amount of color on here. It is a little darker on the other side, but I think in general, we are not getting enough airflow to this charcoal. I should have drilled some holes in the bottom. Been a bit of a challenge to keep these coals going at a good temperature. They're not really lighting the next piece of charcoal in the chain. So you can see on this side, it's a little bit darker. The good news is nothing burning or drying out, which is good. Need to figure out how we continue to keep these coals lit. I think we're gonna let it go for a little bit longer until we need to add more charcoal, see if we need to do anything different. I think actually what I'm gonna do, because we're not getting a huge amount of color, gonna put this piece of wood on and try and get it to catch. Make sure we're nice and smoky. I leave this lid off a little bit, let those coals pick up again, and keep smoking. So we are 6 hours into this cook, and what you didn't see is I gave this brisket a bit of a turn just because it was getting a little bit dark on one side, and it's starting to get a little bit darker on this side too, and a little bit dark underneath, but I think it'll be fine. This charcoal has been running pretty efficiently, surprisingly, but definitely having trouble with that airflow. In terms of internal temperature, in the middle of the flat, we are at 180. This is cooking really fast temperature wise. Although it's high in temperature, I'm not quite happy with the texture of it, so I'm not gonna wrap it just yet. I think it needs a little bit longer. It also needs to be flipped around because we're getting more tender on one side than the other. You can see this side got a little bit darker, but it's not burnt. It's still nice and soft, just a lot darker than the rest, and a nice amount of fat render. In terms of the charcoal, we haven't used a lot. It's such a small space, it doesn't take a lot of charcoal to keep this running. So about 8 hours into this cook, this charcoal is fully spent, and I didn't get a chance to wrap this brisket. It just cooked all the way through, nice and tender. I really thought that I'd have to wrap it. I intended to wrap it. The heat source was so close to the brisket, it just cooked really quick. So no wrap today, I guess, which is good because the charcoal's all done, and I only ended up topping it up once, so pretty happy with that. I'm gonna take this inside, wrap it in some foil, and just let it rest. So here it is. It's been resting for a little bit in some foil. Let's slice into it. Oh, don't ask me why, but I'm finding this piece of meat actually quite cute. It smells really good, smells nice and smoky. In terms of the texture, it's got a nice little jiggle to it. I definitely think it got a little bit dry just in a couple of places, but again, it's not burned because it's still soft, but just have to cut into it and find out, I guess. Oh, could have trimmed this a little bit better. That is looking pretty good. And the flat side, it's so funny how small this is. Let's see what this point end is looking like. Not too bad, and it's pretty much all point muscle up at this end. Not too dry or anything like that. Maybe at the very tip of the point it's a little bit dry. This is actually all point, so let's go down the middle, see what's going on. Bit of a weird muscle structure at the end, and this seam fat probably hasn't rendered out quite as much as I'd like. But yeah, it's looking nice. I'm really happy with the bark on this as well. It's got a nice dark crust on it. Flat is looking nice and juicy. Little flat slice. Oh yeah. Very nice and juicy. Those Sao Paulo briskets always come up good. Nice and fatty, nice and jiggly. Have a bite of this little point end. That is a really good brisket. As usual, good salt levels. Lawry's always does a good job for that. And fat render wise, certainly on the fat cap, it's good. Though it didn't break down that seam fat quite as much as I normally would like. And I think that's just because it was in such a small environment. So it rendered that top fat really nicely, but it didn't have quite enough time to render that fat on the inside. But to be honest, I thought it was gonna be a lot worse than that. I also expected it to be a little bit more shreddy on the bottom. I thought I'd really crisped it up. You can see, it's not burnt at all. Nice, beautiful little burnt end. And other than the issue I had with the airflow, where the vents probably weren't in the best position for the charcoal, it was a pretty easy cook. It cooked super fast, temperature management was mostly easy. I thought it was gonna be a lot harder. This is probably gonna go into making some good chili. I think the Smoky Joe would be perfect if you're just starting out or just looking to get something that you could take on holidays with you, camping or something like that. And I probably plan to give this barbecue away to someone on Instagram, so head over there and follow me, and at some point I'll put a little competition up. So that's all for this video. Thanks very much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, do all those things. It really, really helps me out. I'll see you in a couple of weeks for another video.